حفاظاً على الصالح العام.
For the public interest, the court hereby decides to stop television broadcast of trial proceedings.
The judge presiding over Hosni Mubarak's trial puts an end to live broadcasts of the hearing. Shock, anger and disappointment resonates among some Egyptians as they ask why the biggest case in the country's history should be banned from the public. And has a deal been struck behind the scenes? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abu Gaida. The trial of ousted President Hosni Mubarak resumed on Monday, charged with murder and corruption once the Arab world's most powerful leader was wheeled into the courtroom on a stretcher. Judge Ahmed Rifat ordered an end to the live broadcasts, and he also merged the trials of Mubarak, his sons, as well as the former Interior Minister Habib al-Adli. He then adjourned the trial until September the 5th. Scott Heidler has the details.
In the courtroom inside the police academy, once named after former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, Judge Ahmed Rifat ruled that Mubarak's trial and that of the former Interior Minister Habib al-Adli will be merged, as they both face charges of ordering the killing of protesters during the 18-day uprising that started in January. A move attorneys for the victims' families have been pushing for. The judge also ruled that all of the defendants have to appear at every court session and the trial will no longer be televised. Mubarak returned to the dock under heavy security, the second session of the trial of the former president and his two sons, Ala and Gamal. Nearly 850 people were killed during the revolution. If convicted, Mubarak and Adli could face the death penalty. Like the opening day of the trial on August 3rd, the ill, fallen leader arrived on a stretcher. The older son, Ala, clearly unappreciative of the attention their trial is getting. Police are more prepared than the first time Mubarak appeared in front of a trial. They've set up pens for protesters. Over here you've got the pro-Mubarak protesters separated by a pen of security forces, and then on that side you've got the protesters against Mubarak. One young anti-Mubarak protester at the trial sees the revolution as an awakening.
I'm 18 years old, so I don't know much, but all I do know is that one day I woke up and found myself in Tahrir, and I realized that Mubarak was a thief. While the world was changing, he left us in the dark.
Some out supporting the deposed president viewed the unseating of Mubarak as a blow to Egypt's economy.
Whoever says President Mohammed Hosni Mubarak wasn't a man of many achievements is not someone who has lived in Egypt. He helped improve our economy, but the revolution only made it worse.
But the best laid plans failed. Just as the defendants' names were being read inside the courtroom, stone-throwing clashes broke out between the two groups. Many in the region and around the world are closely following the trial. Mubarak is the first Arab leader to be tried in person since the uprisings across the Middle East started at the beginning of the year. But for now, they will all have to wait until September 5th when the trial resumes. Scott Heidler for Inside Story, Cairo.
For more on this, I'm joined by our guests from Cairo, Ahmed Naguib, who's the co-founder of the Council of Trustees of the Revolution in Egypt, and from Newcastle in the UK, Daniel Newman, who's a professor of Arabic Studies at Durham University. First question over to you, Ahmed. And the judge has said from this point forward, there are no cameras allowed in the courtroom, saying that it's in the best interest, rather, of the public. Is it in your best interest? What do you make of that?
Personally, I don't think so. I think the public needs to see this. It's not enough to see Mubarak in the cage. We need to see justice happening. With someone like Farid Adib, defending Mubarak, he's pulling out tricks like a magician from his hat. And I think this personally upsets me and many of the people who were part of the revolution, to see someone like him pulling tricks, trying to postpone or trying to deviate the judge's attention, or ask for criminal records for those who have died. This is an insult. I think we need to proceed. The whole nation needs to see what's going on inside the court.
Daniel Newman, what's your take on this decision by the judge? Some people even going as far as to say that the case is necessary for public opinion, and also that not airing it on live television means that there's some sort of deal that's been struck with Mubarak. Do you see that to be the case?
Not really, and I think that, I mean, on the one hand, I of course understand the revolutionaries or the people's calls to have it broadcast on television, if only for the symbolic appeal that might have. However, on the other hand, let us not forget that there are a number of democratic countries that do not allow television broadcasting of trials. And whilst we can see that the impact of having Mubarak on the stretcher and his two sons next to him as if they're his nurses, this kind of surrealist pantomime may well have some appeal, but will at the same time also turn or divert the attention from the very serious matter, which is of course the accusations that are laid before Mubarak, Al-Adli and his two sons. So I think that there is a natural call for people to see things going on live. On the other hand, I don't think we should assume that because it's not broadcast on television that somehow a due legal process will not take place. After all, you know, the proceedings will be recorded. I cannot imagine that the judge will forbid that. So it's purely a question of a presentation, and in fact to ensure that indeed the necessary serenity is created for the proceedings to take place.
Ahmed Naguib, over to you in Cairo. It's not only the decision not to allow the cameras in the courtroom, but also to merge the trials of the former Interior Minister Habib Al-Adli as well as the former president and his two sons.
Yes, I think this court would drag for a pretty long time. The procedures have been manipulated by Farid Adib and his crew to be prolonged. And up till now, we have not witnessed the trial itself yet. We've been in just the preliminary procedures, which obviously will continue to be the same case probably by the next court date. Probably the next trial will witness the same thing, just more and more procedures. And this is what frustrates a lot of people, because just when about the real trial is about to start, nobody gets to see it, which it lacks complete transparency.
But at the same time, Ahmed, let me just ask you this, because we've seen clashes outside the courtroom on Monday, as well as the past couple of weeks when the trial began. Those against the former president and those that are standing up for him at this point. I mean, perhaps the judge is thinking right now, if the cameras are allowed into the courtroom, then this could just incite further violence in the country. Can the country risk any more violence right now?
I don't think so. I think it's extremely important for those who have been supporting Mubarak to hear the allegations against him, and especially bringing in evidence will mean that he will lose all credibility and all support, except for those who are benefiting from his regime.
Daniel Newman, I saw you just nodding ahead there with what Ahmed is saying. Would you like to add on to it?
Well, yes. I mean, I agree that one could consider this to be stalling tactics. But if I may, I think much more powerful and robust evidence of that can be found in the way things have been unfolding, in fact, since the trial was first announced. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, there was a first court appearance by Mubarak, his sons Al-Adli, and his subordinates that were accused of these crimes. The judge at that point postponed the trial, adjourned it, for no apparent reason, at least none that I can see, no apparent legal or legalistic reason to do so. Since then, we've had Al-Adli, who's made another court appearance. Once again, we've seen postponement. Now we have the second court appearance of Mubarak and his sons, and what do we see? We see, in a way, a repetition of what was said in the first trial, in the opening session, where, if you remember, the joining of Mubarak, his sons, Al-Adli, and the officials was already announced. The only thing that they've done is taken out a number of accusations, one, the most important of which, of course, is the export of gas to Israel. Now, whilst on the one hand we have to applaud the fact that they've chosen to target the accusations, I have to agree with Ahmed Naguib that indeed these may well, or these appear to be, stalling tactics. But as I've said, not the question that they will or will not broadcast the proceedings on television, but rather the fact that we have these postponements which seem to me to be going on for quite some time. And let us not forget at the same time, it's a very important point that has been forgotten. The defense team, led by Farid Dib, will of course try to make as much capital out of this as possible. And let's not forget, they have a very big ace up their sleeve, which is the fact that they will call a huge number of witnesses, and about 1,500, which would take the trial easily into 2015, if not beyond.
Ahmed Naguib, over to you. 6 months after the revolution, how do you assess the progress? What's gone right?
I think that the military council is taken by surprise and is overwhelmed. They themselves were not competent enough in the past to manage the military, properly. I think we have, from the square, seen a lot of the tanks were in dilapidated status, and obviously they did not do a good job managing the military itself, let alone the entire country.
Okay.
A country as big as Egypt, 85 million people. I think they're not competent enough to manage a country like Egypt. They're trying to do their best. However, their attitude towards the revolutionists have been a very antagonizing one. And I think right now, while we're having the trials of Mubarak, Asma Mahfouz and other activists are being put on trial for criticizing or smearing the military council. This is not a democracy in the making. This is a tyranny in the making. We've replaced Mubarak, a tyrant, with over 20 demigods who think they're above criticism, who think they're above accountability, which is totally unacceptable. And this is a regression, a serious regression. Their misgivings is that this is a country as big as Egypt that had 30 years of corruptions. They received the institutions in a very bad position. However, that doesn't mean that they're responsible for it. They should be delegating some of the responsibility, empower the cabinet more. However, they themselves have been an impediment in the work of the cabinet. So right now, they're not listening to the young people. On the contrary, they look down on them. They try to more or less oppress them and marginalize them more than ever. And at the same time, they're not empowering the government to do its best. And you also have the security situation still haven't been resolved.
Daniel Newman, same question over to you. 6 months after the revolution, how do you see the progress so far? And in terms of the revolution, where do you see it? Are we in the beginning phases of the revolution, or are we in the middle? Where are we?
Well, it's quite an intractable question, but one cannot deny the fact that the record isn't a good one. And if we look back in history, I mean, what we have here indeed is a continuation. I wouldn't say in the making, because it's a continuation of essentially a military dictatorship. That's unfortunately the danger that faces Egypt at the present time. And if I may make a reference to mythology, what we have seen in Egypt is essentially the cutting off of one of the heads of the Hydra, but several other heads have popped out. And the military council is widely seen as the caretaker government in Egypt. But I think it's important to remind your viewers that Egypt does have a caretaker civilian government, which is led by Prime Minister Sharaf. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Sharaf, it's safe to say, has very little power and has done very little except reshuffle his cabinet time and again. So the military council it functions as a kind of Politburo for those of us who remember the days of the Soviet Union, and this is an even greater danger to democracy, where there is a complete lack of transparency. In fact, it is impossible to find out who is responsible for what in this council. The only person whose name we know and who appears regularly is, of course, Tantawi himself. Although when I say appear, he never ever appears in an official capacity, as in, for instance, to make a speech. We see him, for instance, at the graduation of the police academy or some army recruits. But so the problem is that there's no transparency, and that it's clear that the decisions are being made in the shadows.
All right, Daniel, but at the same, let me ask you this. Okay, Daniel, but let me just ask you this. I mean, you're talking about a country that was literally turned on its head 6 months after a revolution, after decades of dictatorship. Where would the country be without the military council trying to at least take over this transitional period?
Well, this is of course the argument that's being put forward. You know, it's either the military council or absolute chaos. If I may draw a parallel with, for instance, Tunisia, the first country that got rid of its dictator, that actually triggered the entire Arab Spring and any subsequent people's movements. There it is clear that the army has retreated into the wings, whereas in Egypt it has done the opposite. And another major difference is that in Tunisia there are clear preparations being made to organize elections. In Egypt, that's still very much lacking. So I'm afraid that we can't be too optimistic here, simply because we find that the military council, rather than preparing itself to hand over power, seems to be increasing its grip on power. And I'm not saying it's too late, but I'm saying that the Egyptian people have to be extremely wary of this.
Ahmed, you seem to be extremely wary of this, because I saw you nodding along there when Daniel was speaking from Newcastle. But what Daniel also mentioned was the Prime Minister, Issam Sharaf. Do you believe that Sharaf has the authority and the power and the desire to change anything right now?
I think Sharaf's performance is self-manifesting a lot of weakness in performance that is based on his inability to confront the military council to have the proper will to enforce changes. I've met with the Prime Minister several times, and we even told him that we would support him if he goes out in public and says that the military council is hindering his efforts to bring about real change. We've asked for a change in the governors and reshuffle the governors, and we've asked specifically for those governors not to be from the military nor the police force. We wanted them to be civilians. 13 of the current governors that were reshuffled are all military and police generals, which is totally unacceptable, because this is the same machine producing the same old politics again. And this is both being imposed on him, and which is not acceptable, that someone who's supposedly the Prime Minister of the revolution would yield to the military council like that.
Do you think, Ahmed, that there are some thoughts floating out there that the military council is trying to hijack the revolution? Do you see that to be the case?
I don't think they're trying to hijack, but they're trying to prolong it. There's a lot of issues and question marks about the transparency of the military before the 25th of Jan. There are many corruption cases that are just surfacing right now. And I've personally met with the head of the Transparency and Accountability Authority in Egypt, who recognizes that there are issues, but all he can do is submit it in a report to the president, which in this case is Tantawi himself. So part of the problem is that Tantawi and the military council have not yet come across a certain group or a presidential candidate that can more or less help the military council get out of the situation they're stuck in. They need general amnesty for everything before the 25th of Jan and after, and at the same time someone to give them enough guarantees that the military will gain more independence, perhaps a little bit like Turkey's military, whereby the Joint Chief of Staff or the Chief of Staff is the highest ranking military officer, and that all the military decisions are taken from within the military institution. So no one has proposed those, or no one yet have the authority to negotiate on that level with the military council. So they're still stuck trying to figure out what they themselves will do. So we need both sides to work on trying to get Egypt to a place whereby all the forces are working towards Egypt becoming a fully fledged democracy.
Daniel, do you agree with Ahmed there that the military is trying to prolong the revolution?
Well, prolonging the revolution, no, prolonging the regime. I think there's a very significant difference between the two. And if I may, it just occurred to me, for instance, if you cast your mind back to the battle cry of the demonstrators on Tahrir that we heard being broadcast into our living rooms on a daily basis, what did they say? We want the fall of the regime. Unfortunately, up until now, what they've had is the removal, and I can't stress this enough, the removal of the figurehead of the regime, which is Mubarak, but the regime is very much in place. Similarly, if you watch Egyptian television now, the banner is saying, you know, Egypt is trying its president. But in fact, the only real proof of the revolution having yielded any fruit would have been if the banner had read, Egypt is putting its regime on trial. And I think that is the big difference. And in relation to one of the points made by Ahmed Naguib, the appointment at all levels, recent appointments by Ghissam Sharaf have indeed confirmed people's worst fears. Every single, for instance, all the provincial governors, the heads of the muhafazat, all the heads of regional government are almost without exception military people. They're all generals. In one case, even a general who was one of the stalwarts of Mubarak. This is the head of the province of Qena in Upper Egypt. So the issue really is that as long as the regime remains in place, as long as the entire security apparatus that supported Mubarak's regime remains in place, I'm afraid that the revolution will remain a damp squib.
Daniel, what has to change then for the old remnants of the regime to go?
Firstly, I think that the constitutional amendments have to be made. And this is a process that's been going on for several months, and I really do believe that it won't take that long. I think they could, if they wanted to, they could wrap that up in a couple of weeks. Secondly, they should once and for all commit themselves to a date for full and fair and democratic elections. Thirdly, they should also take a very close look at the people who are indeed still in positions of power within the government, many of whom are tainted by Mubarak's brush.
Ahmed, Daniel, they're talking about elections, constitutional amendments, among other things. What do you think needs to be done?
Of course, the first thing, the military council has to stop issuing laws under the pretext that they have been giving the authority through the referendum to do that. That's a false pretense. I think they are doing so without going back to the powers to be or the political coalitions and newly established parties. They're just issuing one law after the other without referring or going back to any parties. This is one thing. The second thing is that they have to ensure a certain degree of security for the elections to take place properly. And the other thing is that they need to start by, gradually introducing the elections instead of having a 1 day or 2 day all country, all nation elections. And perhaps even they should have used the municipalities as a test for how the elections could go. If we start with the municipal elections, at least we will have replaced the Mubarak cronies inside the municipalities with a newly elected municipal officials. At least this sets the stage for a proper elections without the normal thugs through the municipalities rigging the elections.
All right. On that note, we'll have to leave it there. Ahmed Naguib from Cairo and Daniel Newman from Newcastle, thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. And of course, thank you to our viewers for watching. We always welcome your comments and your suggestions on the program. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me and the team, goodbye for now.